Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Emma Westcott from the NMC, and thank you very much for spending some time with us this afternoon to take part in this webinar, which we have put on for students. Our target audience this afternoon is probably the students in what we've been calling Wave 2, so those students who started their nursing associate programs probably in sort of March, April 2017. However, we hope it will be of interest and value to any students tuning in who are wondering how things will be arranged when they're finishing their programs and looking to join our register. I'm joined this afternoon by two colleagues, one of whom you'll be able to see and one of whom you won't be able to see. My colleague Andy, who's going to help deliver the slides, and Jeanette is going to deal with your questions as they arise. So hopefully it's clear to you that you can submit questions to us as we go through our slides. And we will be pausing when we remember at sensible intervals to try and take those questions for you. This is a sort of repeat of a webinar that we ran for the first wave of nursing associates who joined our register. And so we've taken on board the sorts of things they asked us and created more content around those themes. So we hope it will be useful for you. So if we can have the next slide. This webinar is going to be covering a very quick welcome to the NMC, because we assume that by this stage in your programs you probably know a bit about us and what we do. We're going to be talking about the sort of countdown for you to your registration. We're going to be talking about what you'll need to do to join our register, and also what your education provider will be doing, and let you know what the next steps are and where you can get information you might need from us if there are any hiccups in your progress onto our register. So first of all, to just rehearse a bit about the NMC, the first thing we want to do is to say we're really excited to become your regulator. We have met many of the nursing associate students in the first few cohorts, and we've been really impressed by the way in which you've approached this exciting new role, and the fact that you've been advocates for it. You're very passionate about what you do, and you're really selling that role to the people on the ground who haven't yet understood or had experience of what it is that you're going to be able to do for your patients and your service users. So we're really pleased that we're involved with nursing associates, and we're very grateful to all of those nurses who've worked with you, both in your universities, colleges, and in trusts and surgeries and other places where you've been learning your role. Because those nurses have really helped you to develop as practitioners to the point where you're ready to join our register. So if we can take the next slide. So you'll know by now, I think, that we are the regulator for nurses, midwives, and now for nursing associates. And nursing associates is only in England, and that we are independent of the government. So we're here to protect the public by making sure that everybody on our register is capable of safe and effective practice, and we do all sorts of different things to achieve that, to try and make sure that we have the workforce that we need in health and care across the UK. You'll also be familiar, I hope, but by this stage in your programs with our standards of proficiency. So when you started your programs, Health Education England had designed the framework that your courses were delivered under, and they had talked about the sorts of things that you were going to learn to do and to know about. But as you were becoming a regulated profession in this country, the way that we organise regulation for professionals is that the regulator sets standards that must be met to get people onto our register. So the standards that we developed, we had the involvement of lots of nurses, lots of students as well. Many of you will have contributed to the consultations. And the standards set out what you will know and be able to do when you first join our register. So it may be that you will be working in settings where you will learn how to do other things. That's absolutely fine, and you may do additional learning pre or post registration based on where you're going to work. That's absolutely fine, but all of you should be able to know and do the things set out in our standards of proficiency. So you will be aware, I think, that you're being assessed as you finish your programs against our standards of proficiency. So you'll be familiarising yourself with those in any case. They'll be forming the backbone of your practice assessment documents, but you need to make sure there's nothing in those standards that you think you haven't yet covered, because that's the basis on which you'll be assessed and judged by your universities to finish the programme successfully. We've included this slide because we thought it might be helpful in a number of ways. Firstly, for those of you who are thinking about going on to become nurses, to train as nurses, you may be interested in what the sort of stretch is, what you'll have to do, what additionally you'll be doing in order to become a nurse. And this just sets out the platforms of our nursing standards against our nursing associate standards. So you can see there's a lot of overlap in terms of the areas, but what the nurses will be trained to do may go into greater depth or complexity in the same sorts of fields, but you will be working across the whole range of nursing proficiencies. The other purpose it might serve, might be helpful for, is when you are out in your first jobs, if people are saying to you, well, what can you do and what can a nurse do and what's the difference between a nurse and one of you, you might want to refer them to some of the differences between the two sets of standards so that they can get a feel for that, because these are new nursing standards as well and people may not yet be familiar with them. Shall I just see if there are any questions coming in there?
We have a question. What is the time frame for a DBS to have been completed prior to registration application?
So this will depend. Some universities and or employers, I mean, you probably already got a DBS through your employer. Some universities will be checking that the person that they're recommending to join the professional register now has a clean DBS as well. So that's nothing to do with the NMC's processes. But the university, assuming it is the university who's requiring you to have a fresh DBS, they will need to, if they're putting that in place, that's one of their requirements, and they will be needing to complete that before they recommend you for registration. So I presume that's something that will probably take place before your exam board meets. Okay, we've got no further questions have come in at this point, so I'm going to hand to Andy to talk to you about the process of registration.
Thanks, Emma. So you're probably all wondering how do I get on the register. So we want to explain to you what the next steps are. Firstly, what your education providers will be doing, and then secondly, what it is you'll have to do as the applicant to join the NMC's Nurse and Associate part of the register. So if we start with what your education provider needs to do. Firstly, Health Education England, who are overseeing your programmes, will let the NMC know, they'll let us know the outcome of their quality assurance exercise that they've been doing to check that your programme is meeting the standards that they expect. When we get that confirmation, we'll send your education provider a course code that they can use, and they'll use that code to upload your qualifications. And when they do that, for each and every one of you, they will make a declaration that you've met our standards of proficiency that Emma mentioned earlier, that you've benefited from the required number of programme hours that Health Education England require, and that also you've had sufficient breadth of experience. As you all know, Nurse and Associate is a generic role, it's not field specific like nursing. So they will be making those 3 declarations to us that they're happy that you meet all 3. They'll also, with your permission, share your contact details with us, ideally an email address, and that means that the registration process is a lot quicker because we don't have to send you letters through the post. So do look out for any correspondence from your education provider where they may be asking for your permission to give us your email addresses. So that's what the education provider does. Why do we ask for all of that? So the reason we ask the education providers to make 3 declarations, and the reason we look at Health Education England's outcome of their quality assurance exercise is to be satisfied that your qualification is comparable to a qualification that would be awarded by an NMC approved programme in the future. So to make this as straightforward as possible, we're looking for your programme to be rated green by HEE, and you'll be pleased to know in wave 1 every single programme was rated green. And as I mentioned earlier, those 3 declarations about you are met. And if that is the case, your registration application will continue as normal. And we'll come on in a moment to what would happen if any of those criteria aren't met.
We've got a question.
We have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The current criteria for cytology training states you need to be on the NMC register. Is that just registered nurses, or can we now take part in this training when we have our PIN?
I don't know. I'm just trying to think if cytology has been raised with us before. We've had other conversations about other sorts of post-registration training, I think in the area of immunology. We probably better check that one, but I mean, I think the straightforward answer would be if the reference in the guidance is to registrants, then you will be registrants. But if it specifically says registered nurses, then you won't be registered nurses. So my assumption is if it just says registrants, that should mean that you are able to access that training. If there are any issues with that, do let us know.
Thanks, Emma. So that's what the education providers do. So what will you have to do as an applicant? You'll receive an email from us, assuming your education provider gives us your email, otherwise it'll be a letter. And you'll be invited to set up an NMC online account. And that's the account that you'll use to communicate with the NMC through your application process. What do we require of you in that process? Well, we'll ask you to self-declare that you have the health and character to practice safely and effectively as a nursing associate. That's a self-declaration. We'll also ask you to confirm that you either already have or will have, when you start to practice, an appropriate professional indemnity arrangement in place. We ask you to let us know about any current or pending criminal charges, cautions, convictions that you may have. That's not to say if you do have anything in your past that would be a bar to registration. It just means that we need to have a look at it and may require some more information from you to make that decision. And we'll also ask if you've ever been regulated by another healthcare regulator or another regulator in another area, whether or not they've ever said that your fitness to practice is impaired. Just move on to the next slide, please. We'll also ask you to give us the name of a referee. Now, this has to be a registered nurse who you've known for 1 year and who you've been in contact with in the last 6 months. Now, it's up to you who you nominate, but some of your education providers may encourage you to nominate someone that's been involved in your education and training, and that's absolutely fine. But it's not a requirement that it's that person, so you can choose whoever you like, but education providers may give you some guidance on who might be well placed to do that. And then last but not least, you have to pay the fee, which is £120. There is some availability of tax relief through HMRC, which last year would have saved you, or you would be able to claim back £24. So that's what we require of you. What we have done in the next few slides is put together some screenshots of the NMC portal, just to give you a quick look at what the screens look like, so you're familiar with it when you start your application. So I'll take you through those now, if that's okay.
Should we just take one more question before we do that?
Do HEIs allocate PINs using the same process for the Bachelors of Nurse course?
I believe they do.
They do.
Yes, we issue the pins out to the HEIs. They usually have a pile waiting, and they'll give you the pins. The pins don't, a lot of people have been interested in whether the pins say things like NA001 and so on, but they don't, I'm afraid. They are boring pins. They're not distinguishable. They won't distinguish you as the first pioneer NAs.
So what do the screens look like? The first thing you'll get is a little summary screen outlining all the different steps that you've got to make, and I talked you through those earlier. So that's just a little summary that you'll see. So we just move on. There's then some space for you to provide or confirm that you have received a qualification that's leading to registration as an NA, and to just confirm that that is the qualification you've been expecting to be uploaded by your education provider, and that you also declare that you've successfully completed that training. This is where we ask you to nominate a registered nurse to be your referee. So you will need to know their PIN number and their surname to be able to do that. And then they will be nominated automatically or notified automatically via an email for them to go onto their NMC online account to make the declarations about you. If we move on. Then there's some tick boxes that you need to make around your health and character. So whether you think you have sufficient health and character to practice safely. Also, as I mentioned earlier, about police cautions, convictions, and whether there's been any other findings about you from another regulator. If you do declare any problems in those areas, as I've said earlier, it's not necessarily a bar to registration, but it just means we might need some more information from you, and we'll be in touch to get that, and then your application will be considered when we have all the information available to us. This is the declaration we ask you to make about your professional indemnity arrangement. Again, it's a yes/no box for you to tick. Many of you, not all, but many of you will have your indemnity through your employer, and it's always worth checking with them. Other people need to make their own arrangements, but that very much depends on the nature of your employment. And then there's some optional information which we capture around equality and diversity. So we have an idea of who is applying to join our register. This is not mandatory, you don't need to complete it, but it's information that's very helpful to us to have a better understanding of the people on our register. And then finally, you get a little summary that reminds you of everything you provided as part of your application. You get a chance to go back and edit it before you hit submit. And then when you hit submit, just move to the next slide, you are asked to make your payment, and you make this payment online like you do with any sort of online payment. I believe it takes you to a recognised bank that takes the payment a bit like you would do on Amazon or something like that. And then that's it. You'll receive an acknowledgement of your application, and once just move on a bit more. Once you've completed all of that, we will notify you by email with your PIN number and confirm that you have been successfully registered. Not everyone wants to apply to register straight away. You may decide you just need a bit of a break, or you might be going traveling, or you might have family commitments. That is absolutely fine. You can actually apply to join the register up to 5 years after you've qualified. But if it depends on your personal circumstances as to whether or not you want to delay or not. I mentioned earlier when we were talking around comparability of qualifications, what would happen if, for example, one of your education providers weren't able to make one of the 3 declarations about you, that you had met our standards, had the required number of hours or the breadth of placement experience. Now, if they feel they can't make that declaration about you at this moment in time, they should let you know and explain to you why that is. And it's also important to remember that it may be possible for you to make up those hours. So potentially you may have had a period off sick, or some other reasons why you haven't quite had the opportunity to achieve the required number of hours or have, say, the breadth of placement experience. And if that is the case, you may just need a bit more time to make up those hours, get that experience. And education providers, in our experience from Wave 1, have been holding people back to give them that opportunity and then upload them when students have met all the requirements. So if you think that could apply to you, then I would encourage you to have a conversation with your education provider now about that. If there is a situation where ultimately those declarations aren't made about you, you are entitled to sit a test of competence to demonstrate that you're eligible to apply for registration, and that test of competence is available now and ready for people to sit. But so far we haven't had any.
We haven't had to use it.
We haven't had anyone that's had to go down that route. So it's not something that we're anticipating large volumes, if anyone, will need to use, but it is available. There's lots of information on our website as well, both for education providers, if there's any on this webinar that want to refresh themselves on what they need to do, and also for you as students. There's lots of information about the different stages in the process and guidance on various steps, such as cautions, convictions I've mentioned, and all the other things that we require of you.
Are there any questions at that point? No questions. Okay, thanks very much. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the next stage for you, which of course is going out and assuming your first jobs as nursing associates, which is the exciting bit. So what does it mean when you start work? What does it mean that you are registered? You're joining a registered regulated profession. So the title of nursing associate is a protected title in England, and that means that in law only certain people can use that title, and it's an offence to claim to be a nursing associate or to offer your services as a nursing associate if you are not only qualified but also registered as a nursing associate. So the implication of that is, of course, that you shouldn't be taking up nursing associate jobs before you are on the register. And if you think employers aren't aware of that, do let them know. Doesn't mean to say they can't start paying you your new wage if they are so minded, but the roles, technically you shouldn't be working as a nursing associate before registration. So thinking ahead a little further now, by becoming someone who's on the NMC register, you'll also be taking part in the process that we call revalidation, which means that when you renew your registration in 3 years' time, you will be going through a process which is about enabling you to demonstrate that you remain capable of safe and effective practice. So what we'll be doing is looking at the hours you've practiced, looking at the learning that you've done. You'll be reflecting with someone who will act as a confirmer for you on your practice over that period of time, feedback you've received from patients and service users, colleagues and others. And so what we want to do is to make sure that when you get to that 3-year point, you're not scrabbling around for the materials to revalidate, because from the outset of your careers, you've been thinking revalidation and you've been collecting that sort of evidence. Then that makes the revalidation process very smooth and straightforward. So again, on our website, there's some really good resources that we know that registrants really value and like. So I know it's not going to be the top of your to-do list when you just start out, but over the next months, do have a look at that and start thinking about how you'll collect and store the information that you'll need for revalidation. I'm going to just mention quickly the code. One of the things that I know that you'll have all looked at the code in your training, and that was one of the things that our council members were very keen to make sure happened. When you become a registered professional, I mean, one of the differences between you and other professions is that you're all working to a code and you're all agreeing to uphold the code, and that's one of your conditions of registration. And the reason that we have a code is to capture the things that the public can expect of us, as everyone on our register, so that they have something that they can use to reflect on the service that they've received from people on our register. And if in some way it doesn't measure up to what their expectations are, they can do something about it. But so the first reason we have a code is to protect the public, but it is also in a way a protection for our registrants as well, because it may be that pressures on service mean that from time to time people may be asked to do things that they don't feel fully confident about. So having a code is also a protection for you, because it allows you to remind your employer, your managers, that there are obligations you have that go beyond your place of work. So it's really important that you feel freshly up to date and familiar with the standards in the code when you start practicing in your first nursing associate roles. And it's all important. I'm not saying that the things I'm highlighting here are more important than the other bits, but essentially do remember the aspects which are about putting the needs of the people in your services first, working within your scope of practice. And this is a really important one for nursing associates as a new role, isn't it? That people will want to get an idea of what it is you know and can do. And there will be anxieties out there. We know about substitution of nursing associates for nurses and so on. So it's really important that you do work within the things that you've been trained to do and you know how to do, respecting the fact that those may change over time, because you will undoubtedly develop new knowledge and skills. And finally, the other standard I'm just highlighting from the code is about your duty to raise concerns, really. That's really important for our patients and service users, that everyone on our register will speak up, no matter how junior they are, no matter how new they are. They will feel empowered to speak up if they see something happening that they feel is not safe. And if you turn out to be wrong, still better that you raised it than that you didn't raise it. So that's a really important part of the culture we all want to see in health and care services. Just want to touch briefly, I know many of you will just be thinking, I can't possibly contemplate another minute of education right now, but there will be some of you, and we know quite a lot of you, who will be thinking, possibly not immediately, but in due course, some of you immediately, about going forward to do further training after your nursing associate qualification, and to train to be a nurse. And we do want people to do both. You know, we really want people to stay as nursing associates, develop the role, grow the role, and be ambassadors for it. And that is a decision of value and of merit in its own right. But we also have deliberately designed this to be a good progression route into nursing for those of you who want to, and you've got the potential to do so. And so you'll be thinking about that next educational level and whether or not you think that that's something that you can achieve, and if you want to do it straight away. So there should be options available to you. You don't have to stay with the education provider you're currently with, but if you're happy and comfortable with the relationships you have there, then you may want to start exploring that with them first. You may want feedback from your course tutors about whether they think that nursing would be a good destination for you. The providers will be able to give you, as it were, recognition of your NA program into your nursing program. So you can have up to 50% of recognition, meaning that, so nursing programs, typically nursing programs are 3 years. That being the case, typically full-time route into nursing from an NA program would be 18 months or half of 3 years. So that's the sort of commitment you'll be looking at, and then if you were doing that via an apprenticeship route, it could take longer. So do think about whether if you want to go forward, would you study via a conventional fee-paying route or an apprenticeship route, and are those two options both available to you locally? And also think about what you want to do about your nursing associate registration if you are going straight on. If you want to, so one thing to think about is if you're going to be revalidating in 3 years, you'll need to meet some practice hours as a nursing associate to revalidate as a nursing associate. So that would mean you would need to have registration in order to practice. And also, if you're taking an apprenticeship route and you're going to be working as a nursing associate while you're training to be a nurse, you'll also need your registration. So those are just some things to think about. Any questions at this point? Okay. So a quick summary of next steps for all of you. If you think there's something that's missing from you're looking at our standards of proficiency, and if you think there's something that you haven't yet learnt, do raise that now with your program provider. And if you've still got stuff to do, don't worry about that. We're advising program providers not to upload people who haven't yet completed but have a good chance of doing so. So that might be, as Andy said, because you've got some hours to cover, because you've got some placement experience to cover, or it could be that you have a resit to do from an earlier part of the course. That's fine. You'll be going into, you can get that done and then go into a subsequent exam board and get your qualification. If you're the only person from your cohort on this webinar, we'd be really grateful if you could raise awareness of it with your colleagues, and it will be going up on our website after the session, so they can look at it there at their own time. So you can think about getting registration ready. In particular, the bit that you need to do is to decide who's going to be your referee. Make sure you've got their permission. Make sure they're going to be around and not on holiday at the time in question, and get their PIN number as well as their surname. If you've got some caution or conviction or charge that you need to think about declaring, do look at the information that's available on the NMC website. And as we've said, please don't get unduly stressed about this. Lots of people on our register, they have things in their past that they did, but they don't mean that they're at this current point in time not fit to practice. So these things needn't be a part of registration, but it does become more serious if you don't declare something and then it comes to light later, because that becomes a question of honesty. So it's really worth just getting it out, getting our response and moving on from it. Remember to let your education provider share your email address with us so that we can communicate with you as quickly as possible. And one of the things about education providers, we will be asking them to let you know when they've done their uploads, because otherwise you may be wondering why you haven't yet got an invitation to open your NMC online account. So we will ask providers to let you know they've done their uploads, because that's what triggers our contact with you. Keep reading our newsletters and visit our websites. And I think on the next slide, there is some information there about how you can find out more via our website, our social media. We've got our email address for nursing associate queries, and there's also our contact centre. And if you have any difficulties, technical difficulties when you come to register, do let us know. Are there any questions at this point yet? Well, that's been a remarkably low question webinar. I hope you don't all think of the questions you want to ask as soon as you get off the webinar, but if you do, you've got the email address there, so just let us know. And it just remains for us to say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Best of luck to you for the final stages of your programs. We hope everything goes well with you, and we look forward to meeting some of you at the many celebration events up and down the country that we're being invited to at the moment, which is a really great way to spend a day. So we look forward to seeing you at those very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.